Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku took the place of Cyborg as a leader of the Justice League. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The silence of space was a lie. From his vantage point 22,300 miles above the Earth, Izuku Midoriya could hear a symphony. It wasn't sound, not in the traditional sense, but a cacophony of data, energy signatures, and intent that his heightened senses had learned to interpret. The hum of the Watchtower's environmental controls was the baseline, a steady rhythm against which the chaotic music of a planet in crisis played out. On the central holographic dais before him, 3 continents glowed with angry, crimson alerts. Coordinated but sloppy, Izuku murmured, his fingers flying across a translucent control panel. His hero costume, a darker, more tactical evolution of his UA uniform, was scarred and worn but immaculately maintained. The cowl was down, revealing a face that had shed its boyish roundness for the sharp planes and determined jaw of a man who had seen too many worlds. Scars, thin and white, traced patterns across his knuckles and cheekbones, souvenirs from a life he could only visit in his dreams. Sloppy is their brand. A voice crackled in his ear, laced with the breezy static of incredible speed. King's trying to monologue again. Something about the house always winning. You want me to get him a soapbox? Izuku's lips twitched into a faint smile. Negative, Flash. His monologuing is giving me the last few variables I need. He's routing the casino's power mainframe through the central city subway. He thinks he's creating a decentralized power source for Jack's hard light holograms in Metropolis. Cute. So, what's the play, Maestro? Izuku's eyes, a vibrant and intense green, scanned a dozen cascading data streams. Power schematics, city infrastructure, thermal imaging. It was like his old hero analysis notebooks brought to life, an infinitely complex puzzle he could solve in real time. This was his battlefield now. Not just a street, but the entire planet. He's inadvertently created his own weakness, Izuku said, his voice a calm, authoritative current flowing to every member of the Justice League. Flash, I need you at the junction of the red and blue lines, Sector Gamma 7. If you can generate a contained electromagnetic pulse by running in a tight figure-8 pattern, you can create a Faraday cage effect around the third rail. It will sever his connection without causing a citywide blackout. A Faraday cage made of speed force. Izuku, you spoil me with the fun science stuff. On it. Barry Allen's voice was gone, replaced by a golden-red streak that zipped across the holographic map of Central City. Simultaneously, Izuku's attention pivoted east, across the Atlantic, where London was under siege by the Queen of the Royal Flush Gang. Her scepter was firing bolts of concussive energy, forcing civilians to scramble for cover behind iconic red telephone boxes and double-decker buses. Wonder Woman, he broadcast, his tone shifting to one of deep, shared respect. Queen's scepter is channeling energy from a stolen Wayne-Tech power cell. It has a 98% energy efficiency. A direct assault is a waste of your strength. Your counsel is wise, Izuku. Diana's voice, a melodic blend of ancient authority and genuine warmth, responded. What weakness does your analysis reveal? Her armor. It's a repurposed Apocalyptian design, but a lower-tier model. Its integrity is compromised at the gorget, the neck plating. She has to expose it to vent excess heat every 20 seconds. A precise, non-lethal strike there will disable her neural link to the armor and the scepter. You'll have a window of 0.7 seconds. There was no hesitation. It will be done. On the London feed, the demigoddess became a blur of red, blue, and gold. She moved not with Flash's impossible speed, but with the divine grace of a warrior perfected over millennia. She deflected a blast with her bracelets, the impact ringing like a temple bell, and flowed around a follow-up attack. Izuku watched her countdown timer in his head, his own muscles tensing in sync. 3, 2, 1, now. As if hearing his thoughts, Diana spun, her shield striking the gorget with a resonant clang. The Queen's armor seized up, sparking uselessly, and the scepter clattered to the pavement. One city remained. Metropolis. The big one. Superman City. Clark, Izuku said, his voice softening slightly. The weight on Superman's shoulders was something Izuku understood on a fundamental level. The 10 of spades is using a kryptonite-laced energy source for her laser grid. It's low-grade, probably synthetic, but prolonged exposure is a risk. I'm reading a radiation spike of 0.04% every minute you're in the field. I can handle it, Deku. Superman's voice was a pillar of calm, but Izuku could hear the subtle strain. I know you can. But you don't have to. Izuku's mind raced, pulling from physics lessons with Barry, tactical sessions with Bruce, and his own ingrained knowledge of how powers interacted. The projectors for her grid are crystalline. They're fragile. A focused sonic boom, precisely modulated, would shatter every last one of them without harming the buildings or civilians. There was a brief pause, then a chuckle from the Man of Steel. Show me a man who can fly, and I'll show you a man who forgets he can break the sound barrier. Good call, Izuku. Thanks for being our eyes. Always. A moment later, the distinctive crack boom of a sonic boom echoed through the metropolis audio feeds. The shimmering, deadly green laser grid fizzled and died. The three-pronged attack, a plan designed to splinter and overwhelm any conventional defense force, had been dismantled in under 7 minutes. Izuku leaned back in the command chair, the tension finally bleeding from his shoulders. He closed his eyes for a second, feeling the quiet thrum of one for all beneath his skin. It was a constant companion, a warm and powerful sea within him. The vestiges of the previous users were a silent counsel in the back of his mind, their experiences and wills a part of his own. Sometimes, in quiet moments like this, he could almost feel the fourth user's quiet vigilance, or the seventh's fierce protectiveness. They had given him this power, this chance to save people, and he would not fail them. A heavy, silent presence made him open his eyes. Bruce Wayne, clad in the full Batman armor but with his cowl retracted, stood beside the command console, his expression as unreadable as ever. He held a datapad, his gaze fixed on the post-mission analytics. Minimal property damage. 0 casualties. 78% faster response time than the initial projections, Batman stated, his voice a low gravel. It wasn't praise, merely an observation of fact. With Bruce, that was often the highest compliment one could get. The gang was overconfident, Izuku replied, running a hand through his perpetually unruly green and black hair. They telegraphed their power sources. It was a matter of connecting the dots. You connect dots others don't see. Bruce countered, finally looking at him. His eyes, sharp and intelligent, held a grudging respect that had been forged over years of missions and late-night strategy sessions. Your analysis of King's power grid was efficient. It avoided a protracted search-and-destroy operation. It's what I'm here for. The relationship between them was the League's central axis of thought. Bruce was the detective, the pragmatist who prepared for every contingency and trusted no one. Izuku was the analyst, the optimist who planned for the best possible outcome, and trusted everyone until they gave him a reason not to. They were oil and water, night and day, and yet, they often arrived at the same conclusion through wildly different paths. It was a partnership that had saved the world more than once. The vulnerability remains, Bruce said, gesturing to a schematic on his datapad. It showed the Watchtower's complex data processing and communication hubs. Our remote access to the gang's network was sluggish. If Victor were here, he didn't need to finish the sentence. The absence of Cyborg was a tangible thing in the Watchtower, a ghost in the machine. Victor Stone's ability to seamlessly interface with any technology had been the League's ultimate information warfare tool. In his absence, they relied on a patchwork system, Batman Incorporated's remote hacking units, Star Labs back-channel support, and Izuku's own quirk-enhanced analysis. It was effective, but it wasn't the same. It was like speaking through a translator instead of being fluent. I'm working on protocols to streamline the data flow, Izuku said. Using float to subtly manipulate the server's microgravity could increase processing speed, but it's a delicate balance. I'm not Victor, no, Bruce agreed, his tone flat. You're not. You're our strategist. And our heavy hitter. The combination makes you a priority target. Which is why you're up here more often than not. It was an old argument. Izuku yearned to be on the ground, to look people in the eye and tell them everything would be okay. But he understood Bruce's logic. His analytical ability was a force multiplier for the entire League. From the Watchtower, he could effectively be in 3 places at once. And with the full, unrestrained power of One for All at his command, a power that could level a city block with a single punch, his presence on the field was often a last resort. The risk of collateral damage was a weight he never stopped carrying. The comms crackled again, this time with the cocksure voice of Hal Jordan, Green Lantern. "Cleanup crew is here in Star City." "That was Ace, right?" Someone should really tell him that a giant, flying playing card isn't as subtle as he thinks. "Requesting permission to return to base. I could use a burger." "Permission granted, Hal," Izuku said with a smile. "Just try not to use a construct to cook it this time. The mess you made last time is still being analyzed by the science division." A grumble from Hal was his only reply. Next came Arthur Curry, Aquaman, his voice a deep baritone that sounded like the ocean itself. "The Ten's attempt to escape through the metropolis shipping canals has been dissuaded. The local marine life was happy to assist. I will remain to ensure the Port Authority's systems are secure." "Thank you, Arthur. Your help was invaluable. We all have a role to play, young Midoriya," Arthur replied, a king's acknowledgement of a fellow leader. "You play yours well." One by one, the members of the League checked in, their mission successful. The crimson alerts on the holographic map faded back to a tranquil blue. Izuku allowed himself a full, proper breath, the kind he only took when he knew everyone was safe. He felt a familiar pang, a phantom ache of homesickness that never truly went away. He wondered what his friends were doing. Was Uraraka on patrol? Was Ida giving a lecture to the new crop of sidekicks? Was Kaken, was he still the #1 hero? He shook his head, pushing the thoughts away. This was his world now. These were his friends, his responsibility. Barry was the first one back, appearing in the command center in a gust of wind that smelled faintly of ozone and streetcar pretzels. He was already out of his cowl, his face flushed with exertion, a triumphant grin plastered across it. "Worked like a charm, Izzy," he said, zipping over to the console and leaning against it. "One minute they had power, the next nada." You should have seen the look on Jack's face when his giant holographic Joker card started flickering like a cheap Christmas light. Izuku smiled warmly. Barry was his closest friend on the team, the one who saw past the powerhouse and the strategist to the slightly awkward, nerdy kids still inside. They'd spent countless hours discussing the physics of their powers, the paradoxes of time travel, and the best way to get pizza stains out of supersuits. "It was your speed that made it possible, Barry. My calculations would have been useless without your execution." "Teamwork," Barry said, clapping him on the shoulder. "It's what we do. Speaking of which," he held up a grease-stained paper bag. "Brought you a little something. Double bacon cheeseburger, extra pickles. I know it's not that katsudon stuff you're always talking about, but it's the best Metropolis has to offer." Izuku's stomach rumbled in a very unheroic fashion. He took the bag with a grateful nod. "Barry, you're a lifesaver. Just paying you back for, the whole saving the city thing." As Barry began to recount his part of the fight in rapid-fire detail, Superman and Wonder Woman arrived via the teleporter, their powerful presences filling the room with an almost palpable aura of gravitas. Clark offered Izuku a small, sincere smile. "Your plan protected a lot of people today, Izuku. That sonic boom was genius. Precise, effective, and no one got hurt. It's my job to worry about the radiation so you don't have to," Izuku replied, feeling a familiar flush of humility in the face of Superman's earnest praise. He and Clark shared a unique bond, the two boys in blue who carried the heaviest burdens. They were the ultimate safety nets, the ones who had to believe in hope even when no one else did. Diana stepped forward, her expression serene but her eyes sharp. She looked from Izuku to the holographic Earth still spinning peacefully at the center of the room. "Your command was exemplary," she said, her voice resonating with the weight of ages. "You wield strategy like a weapon, but it is tempered by a compassion that is all too rare in a warrior. All Might would be proud of the leader you have become." The mention of his mentor's name sent a sharp, sweet pang through Izuku's heart. He swallowed hard, the burger in his hand suddenly forgotten. "Thank you, Diana. That means a lot." It was in this moment of quiet camaraderie, of shared victory and relief, that the symphony of the watchtower changed. A new sound entered the orchestra. It was a single, discordant note, a thin, piercing tone that cut through the station's background hum. On the main console, an alert flashed. It wasn't red for danger or yellow for caution. It was a deep, stark violet, a color Izuku had never seen before. "What is that?" Barry asked, his chipper demeanor vanishing instantly. Izuku was already at the console, his hands a blur. Bruce was at his side in a heartbeat, his own terminal mirroring the data. "It's a long-range, deep space sensor array," Bruce said, his voice grim. "Sector 9. It's been dormant for a decade. It's only programmed to activate for non-standard energy signatures of galactic, or extragalactic origin." Izuku's blood ran cold. He pulled the signal up on the main holographic display. It wasn't a wave or a particle stream. It was a string of data, impossibly complex and structured. But it wasn't a language designed for communication. There was no greeting, no attempt at first contact. It was pure, unadulterated information, but it felt hungry. He activated the Watchtower's Analysis 6. "Computer, translate the signal." "Analyzing," the station's calm, synthesized voice replied. "Signal does not conform to any known linguistic or mathematical models. It is not a message. Then what is it?" Hal Jordan's voice cut in from the teleporter bay as he strode into the command center. Izuku leaned closer, his eyes wide, his analytical mind struggling to find a pattern, a box to put this thing in. He felt a faint prickle at the base of his neck, danger sense, but it was muted, confused. This wasn't a physical threat. It was something else entirely. The signal wasn't just broadcasting, it was actively probing, sending out feelers of data that were tapping against the Watchtower's outer firewalls, testing for weaknesses, learning. He saw it then. The structure wasn't random. It was mimicking biological patterns. It was replicating the search patterns of a predator. It was a digital shark, circling them in the black ocean of space, tasting the water, looking for the scent of blood. "It's a scan," Izuku breathed, the words barely a whisper. "It's not talking to us. It's reading us." Bruce's hands were moving with grim efficiency, reinforcing firewalls, shutting down non-essential ports. "It's looking for network access points, planetary-level comms, power grids. It's looking for a nervous system." Izuku finished, his gaze fixed on the violet string of code that pulsed like a malevolent heart on the screen. The signal's intensity spiked for a fraction of a second. It had found something. Not on the Watchtower, but down on the planet they had just fought so hard to protect. It sent out a single, focused burst of data towards Earth. "What was that? Where was it aimed?" Barry asked, all trace of his earlier humor gone, replaced by the taut readiness of a seasoned hero. Izuku traced the signal's trajectory. It was a tight beam transmission, aimed at a specific point on the globe. Metropolis. Before anyone could ask the next question, the signal on their screen changed. The predatory, probing code vanished, replaced by 3 distinct symbols, emblazoned in the center of the holographic display. They were alien, yet their meaning felt chillingly universal. Izuku didn't know the language, but he understood the grammar of power. This was a signature. A claim of ownership. The routine day was over. The symphony of the Watchtower had been silenced, replaced by a single, terrifying note of prelude. Out in the cold, silent dark, something ancient and intelligent had turned its gaze upon Earth, and the Justice League had just answered the phone. The quiet victory in the Watchtower's command center had evaporated, replaced by a silence so profound it felt like the vacuum of space itself had breached the hull. The 7 heroes stood frozen, their eyes locked on the 3 alien symbols pulsating on the main holographic display. The violet alert signal cast long, ominous shadows across their faces, painting them in hues of dread. Izuku Midoriya and Bruce Wayne were a study in controlled intensity, standing shoulder to shoulder at the primary console, a maelstrom of data swirling around them. For the past 20 minutes, they had been locked in a silent, frantic duel with the unknown signal, their minds the only weapons that could possibly engage it. "It's a mimetic virus," Bruce growled, his fingers a blur as he typed, erecting code fortresses and digital bulwarks. "It's not just scanning, it's attempting to implant itself, looking for a weakness in our core programming to replicate." He saw the problem as an invasion of his digital sanctum, a hostile code seeking to corrupt the machine. Izuku, however, saw something different. His approach was less rigid, more intuitive. He wasn't just reading the data. He was trying to understand its behavior. He had danger sense screaming in the back of his skull, a high-frequency whine of pure, undiluted wrongness. It wasn't the sharp spike of an incoming punch or energy blast. It was a deep, resonant thrum of existential threat, the feeling a cell might have just before being absorbed by a phage. "It's more than that, Bruce," Izuku countered, his voice low and strained. He closed his eyes, letting the data streams wash over his consciousness. "It doesn't want to corrupt our systems, it wants to digest them. Look at the replication pattern." He gestured to a swirling fractal of code on the screen. "It's not attacking, it's mapping. It follows the path of least resistance, flowing through data networks like nutrients through a root system. It's learning the shape of our world's mind." "Biology," Bruce grunted, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. He recalibrated his defense, shifting from rigid firewalls to adaptive, evolving counterprograms, a digital immune system. "It's treating our entire planetary network as a single organism." "Exactly," Izuku affirmed, a knot of ice forming in his stomach. "And we're the brain." Before their debate could continue, a new alarm blared, this one starkly physical. "Energy spike detected in high orbit over the North Atlantic," Barry Allen announced, his body thrumming with nervous energy. "Something just dropped out of, well, nowhere. No FTL signature, no wormhole. It just appeared." On the main screen, the feed from a weather satellite flickered, then stabilized, focusing on a point above the churning gray ocean. An object was descending through the upper atmosphere, cloaked in a shimmering, purple corona of re-entry heat. It wasn't tumbling or burning up. It fell with the deliberate, unhurried grace of something that had mastered the laws of physics and found them wanting. As it broke through the cloud cover, its form became horrifyingly clear. It was a drone, perhaps 50 meters in diameter, shaped like a metallic, three-eyed skull. Its surface was a seamless, non-reflective black, and the three crimson lenses of its eyes glowed with cold, analytical light. It was less a war machine and more a surgical instrument, designed for a purpose beyond mere destruction. "I'm closest," Hal Jordan said, his jaw set. He was already floating a few inches off the deck, his green lantern ring glowing with defiant emerald light. "I'll make first contact." "Hal, wait for analysis," Izuku urged, his danger sense escalating into a piercing shriek in his mind. "We don't know what it is or what it's capable of." "What it is," Hal shot back, his voice ringing with the unshakable confidence that made him who he was, "is an uninvited guest in my sector. And I'm about to read it the eviction notice." Without waiting for another word, he was gone, a green comet streaking from the watchtower's hangar bay towards the descending skull. From the command center, the League watched on a dozen different feeds. Hal arrived on the scene in a blaze of emerald glory. He didn't hesitate. A construct, a massive, fully detailed F-22 Raptor, roared into existence, and launched a volley of shimmering green missiles at the probe. The probe didn't evade. It didn't deploy a shield. The three red eyes blinked in unison. As the missiles approached, thin, hair-like tendrils of violet energy shot out from the probe's surface. They didn't block the missiles, they latched onto them. For a moment, the emerald constructs wavered, their forms flickering. Then, with a sound like shattering glass that no one could actually hear in the vacuum, they dissolved into motes of green light. The probe had not destroyed the constructs. It had unraveled the willpower that gave them form. Hal recoiled in the cockpit of his constructed jet, a grunt of shock and pain echoing over the comms. "What the hell?" It felt like it pulled the thought right out of my head. Undeterred, he pressed the attack. The jet dissolved, replaced by a colossal green fist that swung in a powerful arc towards the skull. Again, the violet tendrils lashed out. This time, they didn't just unravel the construct. They seemed to trace the lines of its creation back to the source. On the watchtower's screen, a horrifying new data stream appeared, originating from the probe. It was analyzing the energy signature of the Green Lantern ring. It was cataloging its frequency, its emotional spectrum component, its strengths, its limitations. It was learning. "Hal, disengage! Now!" Izuku commanded, his voice sharp with urgency. "It's not fighting you, it's dissecting you." The emerald fist disintegrated inches from the probe's surface. Hal, now floating exposed in the open air, threw up a simple, powerful shield. The probe's central eye fired a single, thin beam of purple light. It struck the shield, not with force, but with information. The beam was a targeted counter-frequency, a perfectly modulated stream of logic designed to negate the emotional energy of will. Hal's shield buckled, fractured, and then shattered, the feedback sending him tumbling through the air. That's enough. Superman's voice was low thunder. He was already moving towards the teleporter, but it was too late. The skull probe, its analysis seemingly complete, ignored the falling Green Lantern. Its mission was not to fight. With a low hum that registered on every sensor, it oriented itself and accelerated, streaking not towards a military base or a seat of government, but towards the most densely populated, technologically saturated location on the eastern seaboard, Metropolis. And then the true nightmare began. Simultaneously, alerts erupted across the global map like a plague. Dozens of identical energy signatures appeared in high orbit. Before the League could even process the scale of the threat, the probes descended. One appeared over Gotham City, its 3 red eyes reflecting in the perpetual smog, casting a lurid glow on the gargoyles of the city's Gothic architecture. Another materialized over Central City, a silent, deadly omen hanging in the sky above the Flash Museum. A third descended upon Tokyo, a city Izuku knew only from maps and memories, its alien geometry a stark contrast to the neon-drenched cityscape and the distant, serene peak of Mount Fuji. London, Beijing, Moscow, Cairo, every major hub of human civilization received its own dark herald. They did not deploy troops. They did not fire a single weapon. They simply stopped, hovering 1,000 feet above the city centers, silent and observing. Then, from the underside of each probe, thousands of microscopic, fiber-optic filaments descended, shimmering like a heat haze. They didn't touch the ground. They phased through buildings, through streets, through people, connecting to the unseen world of data that bound modern civilization together. In the watchtower, the data flood was overwhelming. They're accessing everything, Bruce reported, his face a grim mask of controlled fury. Financial markets, power grids, communication satellites, public transportation, medical records. Every piece of network data on the planet is being copied. It's not just copying, Izuku clarified, his eyes wide with horror as he watched the data flow from his home city, Tokyo. It's creating a complete, one-to-one simulation. It's not just stealing our library. It's photocopying our entire civilization, soul and all. On the ground, chaos was beginning to erupt. People pointed at the sky, their phones held aloft, ironically feeding the very machines that were harvesting their world's information. The invasion wasn't loud. It was a quiet, digital exsanguination. I have to get down there, Superman said, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles were white. He was watching his city, his home, being violated in a way he couldn't fight. How do you punch a data stream? What's the plan? Wonder Woman asked, her hand resting on the hilt of her sword. Her warrior's instincts screamed for action, but her leader's mind knew that a blind charge was suicide. We cannot allow this desecration to continue. Hold, Izuku said, his voice cutting through the rising panic. All eyes turned to him. He was staring at the holographic globe, not at the individual crisis points, but at the faint, shimmering lines of energy that were now visible connecting each and every probe. They're networked. They're sharing data, processing power. Just then, a squadron of F-35s from a nearby airbase scrambled to intercept the probe over Gotham. They fired a volley of air-to-air missiles. No, don't! Izuku yelled, but his voice was lost to the winds over Gotham. As the missiles closed in, the Gotham probe did nothing. Instead, the probes over Metropolis, Central City, and Tokyo all flared with energy. A shield, far more powerful than anything the first probe had generated, snapped into existence around the Gotham probe, effortlessly detonating the missiles 100 yards from its surface. Barry's eyes widened. Whoa! Did you see that? The power for the shield, it was routed from the other 3. Attacking one strengthens them all, Izuku whispered, the horrifying logic of it all crashing down on him. He stumbled back a step from the console, one hand going to his head as danger sense unleashed a fresh wave of agony. It wasn't a warning anymore. It was a siren of absolute despair. It was the feeling of 1,000 traps snapping shut at once. They wanted us to attack, he said, his voice trembling slightly. They wanted to analyze our conventional weapons, too. Every action we take, every missile we fire, every plan we formulate, it's just more data for the harvest. We can't fight them. Not like this. The scope of it was paralyzing. This wasn't an enemy to be punched. It was a problem to be solved, but the problem was a sentient, planet-sized supercomputer that learned from every attempt to solve it. His mind, his greatest asset, felt like a child's abacus against a quantum computer. Then we must find a different way, Diana said, her voice a steady anchor in the storm of uncertainty. There is always a weakness, but to find it, we need to know what we're fighting, Bruce said, his gaze turning to the one person in the room who might have an answer. Clark. Superman turned from the view of his besieged city, his face etched with a pain that went deeper than any physical blow. I've never seen anything like this, not in your lifetime, Bruce pressed, pulling up a new window on the main screen. But what about Kryptons? In the data Crystal Jor-El sent with you, the historical archives, were there any legends, any myths of a threat like this? Clark's brow furrowed in concentration. The archives were vast. Much of it was corrupted. But there were warnings. Apocryphal tales the Science Council dismissed as fearmongering, stories of worlds that just vanished. Not destroyed, but collected. Izuku's head snapped up. Collected? That's the word they used, Clark said, his voice distant. A cosmic intelligence that roamed the universe, seeking out unique civilizations. It believed that all life was doomed to chaos and self-destruction. Its solution was to preserve the knowledge of a planet by digitizing and bottling its greatest city, and then destroying the planet itself to prevent further contamination of its data. A chilling silence fell over the command center. The quiet, methodical harvesting taking place on Earth suddenly had a terrifyingly logical, monstrously insane endgame. Did these legends have a name for this collector? Batman asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Clark closed his eyes, accessing memories that weren't truly his, echoes from a dead world. Jor-El mentioned it once, in a fragmented message I could barely restore. A final, desperate warning he tried to embed in Krypton's network before the end. He called it a name that was ancient when Krypton was young. A being of living technology, a god of knowledge and termination. He opened his eyes, and they were filled with the sorrow of a lost world and the horror of a new threat. He called it Brainiac. As the name echoed in the silent room, the central probe hanging in the skies of Metropolis stirred. Its silent harvesting ceased. The thousands of data filaments retracted into its hull. The city below held its collective breath, the sudden silence more terrifying than the silent invasion had been. The probe's central crimson eye began to glow with blinding intensity. It projected a beam of light into the clouds, not of energy, but of information. The light coalesced, forming a colossal, three-dimensional image in the sky, a holographic giant that dwarfed the tallest skyscrapers. It was a figure, humanoid but chillingly alien. Its skin was a pale, sickly green, its head enlarged and bald, devoid of any hair. Wires and glowing nodes were embedded directly into its cranium, pulsing with cold, purple light in a terrifying mockery of a circulatory system. But its eyes were the worst part. They were intelligent, ancient, and utterly, completely devoid of emotion. They looked down upon Metropolis not with malice or anger, but with the detached curiosity of a biologist examining a specimen under a microscope. Then it spoke. Its voice was not broadcast through the air. It was transmitted directly into every communication device, every radio, every television, every mind on the planet. It was a synthesized, calm, and perfectly modulated tone, the voice of pure, dispassionate logic. You have been chosen. The voice of Brainiac resonated across the globe, a death sentence delivered as a pronouncement of honor. Your world is an interesting amalgam of primitive emotion and nascent technological advancement. Its chaos is unique. It is worthy of preservation. In Metropolis, Superman floated in the air, a lone figure of defiance against the colossal, spectral face of the alien. He could hear the screams of terror, the cries of confusion, the dawning, planet-wide horror. I am Brainiac. The voice continued, a simple statement of absolute power. Your knowledge will be added to my collection. Your culture, your science, your art, it will all be saved from the inevitable entropy of your existence. The holographic face gazed down, its expression unchanging. It looked at the millions of people, the heroes, the hopes and dreams of an entire world, and saw only data points to be archived. Your physical existence is a messy, inefficient byproduct of this knowledge. It will be terminated. Do not resist. Your compliance will make the process of collection efficient. The hologram flickered and then vanished. The probe over Metropolis, and every other probe across the world, began to glow, their engines humming with a new, terrible purpose. The harvest was over. The collection was about to begin. In the watchtower, Izuku Midoriya stared at the blank screen where Brainiac's face had been, the cold, clinical words echoing in his mind. The existential dread from his danger sense had finally coalesced into a single, understandable certainty. This wasn't just a battle for their cities or their planet. It was a battle against erasure. It was a fight for the right to exist, to be messy and inefficient and chaotic. It was a fight against a god who saw life as nothing more than a footnote in his library. And Izuku, the boy who analyzed everything, had no analysis for how to win. Brainiac's final word, efficient, hung in the air of the Watchtower Command Center like the cold promise of an executioner's axe. The colossal hologram vanished from the skies of Earth, but its chilling afterimage was burned into the mind of every hero present. For a long, stretched moment, the only sound was the frantic thrum of data as Bruce and Izuku tried to make sense of the new energy readings emanating from the probes. The silence was not one of peace, but the held breath before a catastrophic storm. It was Hal Jordan who broke it. The emerald light of his ring flared, a stark, angry contrast to the cool blues and violets of the command room. "So that's it, then?" he demanded, his voice a low growl of contained fury. He paced before the holographic globe, a caged tiger made of pure willpower. "Some green-skinned computer chip declares war on our planet, and we're supposed to just stand here and let it happen? I don't think so. We hit that thing over Metropolis, and we hit it with everything we've got until it's nothing but a pile of scrap. A direct assault would be satisfying." Arthur Curry agreed, his deep baritone resonating with kingly authority. He stood with his arms crossed, his regal presence a challenge to the alien's declaration. "This creature has insulted our world. It has threatened our people. Such an affront cannot go unanswered. A show of force is required." Diana stepped forward, her expression one of grim resolve. Her hand rested on the golden pommel of her sword, not in threat, but with the familiar comfort of a warrior preparing for a righteous battle. "Hal is blunt," she began, her gaze sweeping over her comrades. "But his sentiment is true. We are the shield of this world. We cannot show fear or hesitation. We must meet this declaration with a strength that will echo through the cosmos. We will show this collector that this world is not a specimen to be bottled. It is a home to be defended." The sentiment was contagious. Barry Allen, who had been vibrating with nervous energy, solidified, his face set in a determined mask. "They're right. We can't just sit up here while that thing looms over Central City. We have to do something." Even Superman, who had remained silent, his gaze fixed on the live feed of his terrified city, finally turned. The agony in his eyes was now tempered with steel. "Metropolis will not fall. I will not allow it. We have to strike." A chorus of assent seemed to fill the room. The initial shock had been replaced by a powerful, unifying surge of defiance. They were the Justice League. They did not bow. They did not break. They fought. "No," the single word, spoken with quiet but unyielding firmness, cut through the rising tide of aggression. It came from Izuku Midoriya. He was still standing at the console, but he had turned to face them, his expression etched with a deep, unsettling anxiety. His danger sense wasn't just whining anymore. It was a full-blown klaxon, a primal scream in his soul telling him they were all walking towards the edge of a cliff. "Izuku?" Clark asked, his brow furrowed with concern. "We can't attack," Izuku said, his voice gaining strength as he pushed past their collective disbelief. "Don't you see? This is exactly what it wants. This is the final step in its analysis." Bruce, silent until now, finally spoke, his voice a low gravel that commanded attention. "He's right. The first probe engaged HAL to analyze the power ring. The coordinated arrival of the other probes was a test of our global response time. The attack on Gotham was a baited trap to measure our conventional military capabilities. Every action we have taken has been a reaction, and it has recorded and learned from every single one. Izuku nodded, stepping forward into the center of the room. He felt like the boy in his UA classroom again, trying to explain a complex theory to friends who just wanted to get to the practical exam. Think of it like one of my analysis notebooks, he explained, his hands gesturing as he tried to paint them a picture. Brainiac has filled in almost every page on us. He knows Superman's strength, Flash's speed, Green Lantern's power source. But there are still blank spaces. He doesn't know the upper limits of our power. He doesn't know how we coordinate in a full-scale assault. He doesn't know how we combine our abilities. Attacking that probe now, it's like willingly sitting for a final exam that we don't know is a trap. We'll be handing him the completed notebook on how to defeat us. Hal threw his hands up in exasperation. So what's your plan, Midoriya? We sit up here and let it collect Metropolis? We hide? We're the Justice League. We strategize. Izuku countered, his voice rising with passion. We find a variable it can't account for. We gather our own intel. We attack it from an angle it doesn't expect. This thing thinks in pure logic. We need to be illogical. We need to be unpredictable. A head-on assault is the most predictable thing we could possibly do right now. The room was split. The palpable tension was no longer directed at the enemy in the sky, but at each other. The core philosophical divide of the League, action versus caution, heart versus mind, was laid bare. It was Diana who finally broke the stalemate, her voice firm but respectful. Izuku, your mind is a gift, and your caution has saved us many times. But there are moments when strategy must give way to necessity. There are millions of terrified people in that city. They need to see us fight for them. They need to see hope. A show of overwhelming force is not just a military strategy. It is a message. And it is a message we must send. Clark nodded in solemn agreement, his gaze falling upon Izuku. There was apology in his eyes, but also an unshakable resolve. I understand your warning, Izuku. I truly do. But I can't wait. I can't stand by while my city is held hostage. We have to fight. Now, the decision was made. The weight of the League's most powerful members had tipped the scales. Izuku looked at Bruce, who gave a nearly imperceptible shake of his head. He had argued his case and lost. The plan was set. Izuku's shoulders slumped, the fire of his argument replaced by the cold ashes of dread. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that they were making a catastrophic mistake. But he also knew his duty. If they were going to walk into the trap, he would walk in with them. He would do everything in his power to make sure they all walked out again. All right, he said, his voice devoid of its earlier passion. Let's go. Metropolis was a city holding its breath. The colossal skull probe hung in the sky like a malevolent, unblinking god. Below, the streets were a chaotic tapestry of abandoned cars, frightened citizens huddled in doorways, and the blaring, unanswered sirens of emergency services. Then they arrived. 7 streaks of light descending from the heavens. Hope made manifest. Superman was the tip of the spear. He flew forward, a crimson and blue missile of pure, unadulterated power, his body wreathed in a shimmering aura of kinetic energy. His target was the probe's central eye, the source of the terrifying hologram. The probe did not erect a shield. As Superman closed the distance, the air around him grew thick, heavy, as if the universe itself were pushing back. A localized gravity field, orders of magnitude greater than anything on Earth, enveloped him. His flight faltered, his incredible speed bleeding away into a gut-wrenching struggle. It felt like flying through wet concrete. It's increasing the gravity, he grunted over the comms, his muscles straining as he pushed forward inch by agonizing inch. It's like trying to punch a black hole. Brainiac wasn't trying to stop him. It was using his own momentum against him, turning his greatest asset into an anchor dragging him from the sky. From the left, a golden streak of lightning resolved into the flash. I'll phase through it and rip its guts out before it knows what hit it, Barry yelled, pushing his speed to its absolute limit. He became a blur of pure motion, his feet barely touching the ground as he raced up the side of the LexCorp tower to get a better angle. He leaped, intending to vibrate his molecules straight through the probe's hull. But as he approached, shimmering pockets of space-time appeared in his path. They looked like heat haze, subtle distortions in the air. He tried to swerve, but his speed was too great. The moment he touched the first distortion, his world became a slideshow. He was running through pockets of frozen time. One moment he was at full speed, the next his leg was trapped in a temporal stasis field, the atoms around him locked in a single instant. He was navigating a minefield of frozen moments, his speed rendered useless by an enemy that could predict his path and pause the universe in his way. "It's anticipating me," he stuttered, his voice skipping like a scratched record. "It's laying traps, in time." On the right flank, Wonder Woman soared into the fray, her lasso of truth glowing brightly. "If it can be created, it can be compelled," she declared, whipping the lasso in a perfect, glowing arc towards the probe. The lasso flew true, but before it could make contact, the probe's hull shimmered. A shield, composed of swirling, complex energy patterns, snapped into place. The lasso struck it and went dead, the golden light dimming as if shorted out. "What is this sorcery?" Diana cried out, pulling the lasso back. "It's not magic, Diana!" Bruce's voice crackled, filled with grim realization. He was circling the battlefield in the Batwing, his sensors working overtime. "The shield is generating a counter-resonance." It analyzed the lasso's energy signature, its connection to divine truth, and created a frequency of pure, mathematical nihilism. "It's fighting a concept with an opposing concept." Undeterred, Diana drew her sword, a blade forged by Hephaestus himself, capable of carving atoms. She dove, swinging the legendary weapon in a glittering arc. The shield shifted its composition instantly, its energy pattern changing from a nihilistic frequency to a dense, multi-layered chronoton field that warped space around the blade, causing her strike to slide harmlessly off into empty air. The message was clear. Your gods, your speed, your strength, they are all just data. And all data can be countered. From the ground, a new force joined the battle. A verdant green blur shot up from the ruined streets below. It was Izuku. He couldn't stay on the sidelines. He couldn't watch his friends be dismantled. "One for all, full cowling, 45%. Green bioelectricity crackled around him as he launched himself into the air, a whirlwind of motion and power. Black whip tendrils, dark and powerful, erupted from his arms, latching onto nearby buildings to propel him higher, faster. This was his city now, too, and he would defend it. The moment he entered the combat zone, a new set of entities deployed from the main probe. They were smaller, no larger than a bird of prey, shaped like metallic beetles. They swarmed towards him, their single red eyes glowing. They weren't attacking. They were scanning. Izuku ignored them, focusing on the larger threat. He used Black Whip to ensnare one of the probe's external sensor arrays, anchoring himself. He began to channel power into his legs, preparing a kinetic strike. He would use FA Gene, building up the energy from his movements into a single, devastating kick. 1, 2, 3. He built the power, feeling the familiar surge of stored energy humming in his muscles. He was about to unleash it when a strange, dampening field enveloped him. The humming sensation vanished. The stored kinetic energy was just gone. Siphoned away. The beetle drones had analyzed the energy signature of FA Gene and deployed a countermeasure that bled the kinetic charge into the atmosphere. It was like trying to light a match in a hurricane. Frustrated, Izuku released the Black Whip tendrils and changed tactics. He would go for a direct physical assault. He rocketed towards the probe, arm cocked back for a Detroit smash. This time, the counter was even more insidious. One of the beetle drones fired a thin, almost invisible needle that struck his shoulder. He barely felt it, but a moment later, his control over One for All wavered. The green lightning sputtered. His muscles felt sluggish, unresponsive. A targeted neurotoxin, designed to interfere with his quirk factor's connection to his nervous system. He was being dissected, piece by piece. His powers, so unique and varied, were being catalogued, analyzed, and neutralized in real time. The trap he had warned them about was snapping shut, and he was the main course. It was then that the probe stopped fighting back. The gravity field around Superman dissipated. The temporal traps vanished from Flash's path. The adaptive shield around the probe lowered. For a breathtaking moment, the heroes hung in the air, battered, confused, but seeing an opening. "It's letting its guard down!" Hal yelled, forming a colossal battering ram. "Now's our chance! All together!" But Izuku, his body fighting off the effects of the toxin, knew better. He looked at the swarm of scanner drones recalling to the main probe, their red eyes blinking with captured data. "No!" he whispered, the word lost in the wind. "It's not letting its guard down. It's done!" He looked up at the sky, and his heart turned to ice. A shadow was falling over Metropolis, a shadow so vast it eclipsed the sun. The clouds began to part, not from wind, but from the sheer displacement of something enormous descending from orbit. It was the Skull Ship. It was larger than any of them could have imagined, the size of a city in its own right, a perfect, terrifying macrocosm of the probe they had been fighting. Its three massive, crimson viewports glowed like the eyes of a judgmental god, looking down on their futile struggle with something akin to pitying contempt. The small probe, its purpose served, ascended gracefully and docked with its gargantuan parent. The entire city fell into an awed, terrified silence. The scale of their true enemy was finally, crushingly apparent. What is that?" Barry stammered, his bravado completely gone. "The final exam." Bruce's voice was a ghost over the comms. "And we just gave it all the answers." As if on cue, launch bays opened all over the Skull Ship's surface. But what emerged were not more scanner drones. These were hunters, sleek, menacing machines, each one different, each one a purpose-built nightmare. A squadron of silver drones streaked towards Superman. As they neared, their front panels opened, bathing him in a focused, intense beam of pure red sun radiation. His strength abandoned him in a nauseating rush. He cried out, not in pain, but in sheer helplessness, as he began to fall from the sky. Another group, phasing in and out of visible light, swarmed the Flash. They didn't try to catch him. They moved with him, ahead of him, appearing exactly where he was about to be, laying down fields of energy that disrupted the speed force, causing him to stumble and trip like a newborn foal. Warriors, forged in black metal and purple light, descended upon Wonder Woman. They moved with impossible grace, their combat style a perfect mimicry of Amazonian martial arts, their energy blades flaring to life, each one calibrated to the exact frequency needed to parry her divine sword. They didn't just fight her. They used her own perfected style against her. And for Izuku, a special kind of horror. A single, larger drone descended before him. It didn't attack. It emitted a low-frequency field. And in that instant, One for All vanished. Not dampened, not weakened, gone. The warm sea of power within him, the voices of the vestiges, the crackling energy, all of it winked out of existence, as if it had never been. He was just a man in a costume, plummeting towards the ground, his greatest strength erased. The fight was over before it began. It wasn't a battle. It was a systematic, clinical dismantling. The Justice League, the most powerful collection of heroes the world had ever known, was being swatted from the sky like insects. Black whip tendrils, weak but still functional on some residual level, shot from Izuku's arms, snagging on a flagpole as he fell. He swung down, crashing hard onto a rooftop, the impact jarring every bone in his body. He was powerless, vulnerable. "League, fall back! That's an order!" Batman's voice roared over the comms, a command born of pure, desperate pragmatism. He laid down a cloud of smoke and chaff from the Batwing, providing what little cover he could. One by one, they disengaged. Diana, forced into a defensive posture for the first time in centuries, rescued the weakened Superman. Hal created a wall of green energy to cover Flash's chaotic retreat. They were broken. Humiliated. Defeated. They regrouped in the ruins of Centennial Park, the very place the city had erected a monument to Superman. Now, it was their sanctuary of failure. They were bruised, bleeding, and shrouded in the shadow of the colossal ship above. The hunter drones did not pursue them. They were no longer considered a factor in the equation. Izuku pushed himself to his feet, the null field's effect fading now that he was out of its range. One for All trickled back into him, a painful, pins and needles sensation. But the return of his power brought no comfort. It only amplified the crushing weight of his guilt. He looked at his friends, at the greatest heroes in the universe, all of them looking up at the sky in shared disbelief and horror. He had warned them. He had pleaded with them. He had seen the trap, and they had walked right into it. As they watched, the skull ship began to hum, a low, resonant frequency that shook the very foundations of the city. A ring of light, composed of millions of shimmering, hexagonal energy cells, was projected from the ship's underside. It descended slowly, majestically, like a crown being lowered onto the city's head. It passed through buildings as if they were ghosts, a beautiful, terrifying cage of light. They were watching the bottling process begin. They were watching Metropolis, and its millions of souls, being collected. Izuku Midoriya, the boy who dreamed of saving everyone, stood among his defeated friends and watched as an entire city was stolen from the world. He had been right, and in the face of this absolute, coordinated failure, being right was the most painful thing of all. The watchtower, once a symbol of vigilance and hope, now felt like a tomb. The heroes had retreated not in victory, but in a rout so absolute it had stripped the very air of its triumphant hum. The silence in the command center was a suffocating shroud, heavier and more profound than the vacuum of space just beyond the panoramic viewport. Below them, the Earth was a wounded jewel. A gaping, digital scar now existed where Metropolis once thrived. The city wasn't a crater, it was a void. All communication, all sensor readings, all signs of life simply stopped at the edge of Brainiac's energy field. The mood was grim, a poisonous cocktail of shock, grief, and simmering rage. Hal Jordan stood with his back to the room, his fists clenched at his sides, staring out at the planet. The emerald glow of his ring was dim, flickering with the turmoil of his emotions. Arthur Curry was a statue of regal fury, his gaze fixed on the blank space on the holographic map that had been Metropolis. Diana sat at the long briefing table, her head in her hands, her divine spirit wrestling with a mortal sense of failure. Barry Allen was a blur of motion, pacing a groove into the floor plating, unable to outrun the defeat that clung to him like a shroud. And Clark was gone. He had retreated to the solar bay, a chamber that opened directly to the unfiltered light of the sun, seeking to purge the red sun radiation from his cells. But everyone knew he was also seeking solitude for a grief so immense it could crack mountains. His city, his people, his home, gone. Captured. Preserved in a bottle like some grotesque ship. Izuku Midoriya was in the strategy room, a smaller, darker chamber off the main command center. Here, there were no majestic views of the cosmos, only walls made of pure data. Holographic displays surrounded him, endlessly replaying the last 20 minutes of their catastrophic failure. He was a conductor orchestrating his own requiem, forcing himself to watch every missed note, every fatal crescendo. Freeze frame. The moment Superman's flight faltered in the gravity well. Izuku zoomed in, analyzing the energy signature. It wasn't a simple gravity manipulation. It was a targeted distortion, calibrated precisely to Superman's unique bio-aura. Data gathered from years of Superman's public appearances, cross-referenced with his known power levels. Rewind. Play. The temporal stasis traps deployed against Flash. They weren't random. They were predictive, laid down microseconds ahead of Barry's path. Brainiac hadn't just calculated his speed, it had calculated his decision-making process, the subtle tells in how he chose his path. Fast forward. The null quirk field used against him. Izuku watched his own body go limp, one for all vanishing as if a switch had been flipped. The data stream was horrifyingly elegant. Brainiac had somehow scanned the unique energy signature of his quirk factor and generated a precise counterfrequency. The information must have been gathered by the Beetle drones during their brief, terrifyingly efficient scan. He slammed his fist against the console, a crackle of green energy shorting out the display for a second before the fail-safes kicked in. The ghost of pain in his knuckles was nothing compared to the agony in his chest. Guilt. It was a familiar poison, one he had carried since the day Sir Night-Eye died. He saw his mentor's final, gasping words, his vision of a future Izuku had failed to prevent. He saw All Might, frail and skeletal, pointing a bony finger at the screen, his voice a disappointed whisper in Izuku's memory. I chose you to be a symbol, my boy. A symbol of hope. What hope is there in this? He had failed them. He had failed their legacy. He had been given the sacred fire of one for all, a torch passed down through generations of heroes who sacrificed everything, and he had let it be snuffed out by a cold, calculating machine. He slumped into the command chair, the weight of it all pressing down on him, threatening to crush the very breath from his lungs. He hadn't argued hard enough. He hadn't been forceful enough. He had let their collective grief and anger override his analysis. A true leader would have found a way to make them listen. A true leader would have. There was nothing you could have said. The voice, a low and gravelly baritone, cut through his spiraling self-recrimination. Izuku didn't need to look up to know who it was. The shadows in the room seemed to deepen, to coalesce into the form of Bruce Wayne. He stood by the doorway, out of his armor now, dressed in simple black fatigues. His face, etched with lines of exhaustion and grim fury, looked older than it had just a few hours ago. He was holding 2 steaming mugs. He walked over and placed one on the console next to Izuku. It was a rich, dark coffee, the aroma cutting through the sterile air of the room. Bruce took a sip from his own mug, his gaze fixed on the frozen image of their defeat on the main screen. I heard you, Bruce continued, his voice quiet but resonant. I agreed with you. And I still didn't stop them. We were outnumbered. We shouldn't have been. Izuku whispered, staring into the black depths of the coffee. I should have. I don't know. Locked them in the watchtower. Something. I saw the trap, Bruce. I felt it, and I let them walk right into it. Them? Bruce's voice had a sharp edge. You were right there with us, Midoriya. You jumped in the moment you thought you could help, because it's my job to help. Izuku snapped, his voice cracking with emotion. He stood up, pacing the small room, the pent-up energy of his quirk making the air crackle around him. It's my job to save people. That's the entire point. I'm supposed to be the one who never gives up, the one who finds a way. But I didn't. I just watched. You analyzed. Bruce corrected him, his tone unyielding. He gestured to the screens. While the rest of us were fighting a battle, you were studying the war. Don't confuse the two. He took another slow sip of coffee. Tell me what you see. The question was a lifeline, a familiar routine in a world that had become terrifyingly unfamiliar. Analysis. Strategy. It was the ground they met on. Izuku took a deep, shuddering breath, forcing the emotional storm inside him to recede. He turned back to the screens, his eyes sharpening, the strategist pushing the grieving hero aside. It's efficient, Izuku said, the word tasting like ash. Horrifyingly so. It doesn't waste energy. It doesn't use overwhelming force where precision will do. It fights ideas, not people. It didn't try to overpower Clark. It used his own biology against him. It didn't try to outrun Barry. It controlled the environment he ran through. Every countermeasure was a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. It thinks, Bruce affirmed. It learns. And it is utterly without passion. It is a predator of pure logic. And that, he said, finally looking at Izuku, his gaze intense, is the crux of your failure. Izuku flinched as if struck. My failure? Your plan. Bruce clarified, his voice dropping even lower, becoming something more personal, more confessional. The one you were formulating before they decided to charge in. I could see it in your eyes. You were trying to create a plan to out-strategize it. To be smarter, faster, more logical. To create a perfect plan to save everyone. Izuku opened his mouth to argue, but stopped. Bruce was right. That's exactly what he had been doing. He'd been trying to build a better logical mousetrap. Bruce set his mug down with a soft click. He stepped closer, into the light of the holographic displays, and for the first time, Izuku saw the full, crushing weight of failure on the Batman's face. It was a look he had seen in the mirror countless times. I've spent my life creating plans, Bruce said, his voice a low murmur, haunted by ghosts only he could see. Contingencies for contingencies. I have plans to take down every member of this team, plans to stop alien invasions, plans to defuse city-leveling bombs. And every single one of them is built on a foundation of logic, prediction, and control. He paused, his gaze becoming distant. And my greatest failures, the moments that haunt me in the dark, were when I faced something that logic couldn't touch. The chaotic madness of the Joker, the death of a son who defied every prediction I ever made about him. He looked back at Izuku, and there was a rare, raw vulnerability in his eyes. You and I are alike, Midoriya. Our minds are our greatest weapons. But they are also our cages. We believe that if we can just think hard enough, plan perfectly enough, we can control the outcome. We can prevent the pain. He gestured to the image of Brainiac's ship. This enemy doesn't see people, it sees data points. It doesn't feel hope or despair, it calculates probabilities. You can't win by outsaving it, because it doesn't value what you're trying to save. You can't win by outplanning it, because its ability to process information is infinitely greater than ours. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, the advice of one dark strategist to another. So you have to stop thinking like a hero trying to save the day. You have to start thinking like something else. Something it won't expect. Be ruthless. Be unpredictable. Be a predator hunting a predator. The words struck Izuku with the force of a physical blow. Be a predator. It went against every fiber of his being, every lesson All Might had ever taught him. Heroes saved. They protected. They didn't hunt. But as he looked at the cold, logical perfection of their defeat, he realized Bruce was right. He had been trying to play chess with a supercomputer. You couldn't win that game. The only way to win was to knock the board over. A tiny spark ignited in the darkness of his mind. An idea, wild and chaotic, began to form. Brainiac's strength was its centralized processing, its ability to analyze and counter any single, coordinated threat. Their mistake had been attacking as one entity, one massive data point for it to analyze. What if they weren't one entity? What if they were 7? Chaos, Izuku whispered, the word tasting strange and powerful. Bruce's lips quirked in the barest hint of a smile. Now you're thinking. It processes everything through a central hub. Izuku began, the thoughts coming faster now, a torrent of frantic energy. He began pacing again, but this time it wasn't aimless. It was the caged energy of a mind at work. It sees the League as a single weapon system. Superman is the artillery. Flash is the cavalry. You and I are the intelligence unit. It breaks us down into components, and creates counters for each. He stopped, turning to Bruce, his eyes blazing with a new, wild light. But what if the components don't work together? What if they do the opposite? What if we attack its systems with things it can't quantify? Things that don't have data points? Such as? Bruce prompted, his interest piqued. Such as hope, Izuku said, a manic grin spreading across his face. Such as rage. Such as pure, unadulterated chaos. We can't fight its logic with better logic. We have to overload it. We have to feed it so much conflicting, nonsensical data that its processors choke. He strode over to the main console, pulling up the global map. He dismissed the replay of their defeat, replacing it with a fresh slate. He started creating new team designations, dragging icons across the holographic display with renewed purpose. We don't do one big assault. We do 5 simultaneous, seemingly disconnected operations. Most of them aren't even attacks. They're distractions. Noise. We introduce so many illogical variables into the system that Brainiac will be forced to divert its primary processing power just to make sense of it all. And in that moment of confusion, he drew a single, thin line from a stealth transport directly to the heart of the Skull ship hanging over Metropolis. A scalpel can slip through its defenses. Bruce looked at the plan taking shape on the screen. It was audacious. It was reckless. It was borderline insane. It relied on a dozen factors all going right, on perfect timing, and on the individual members of the League performing tasks that were wildly outside their normal combat parameters. It was perfect. It's a gambit, Bruce stated, the word an assessment, not a criticism. It leaves no room for error. That's the point, Izuku said, his voice ringing with a conviction that had been absent just minutes before. The weight on his shoulders was still there, but it was no longer the weight of failure. It was the weight of command. It's a plan that Brainiac's logic would dismiss as statistically improbable to the point of impossibility. It won't see it coming because it's a plan built on trust, not probability. On heroism, not logic. He looked at Bruce, the student seeking the approval of the master. It's time to stop letting it analyze us. It's time we introduced it to the human element. The guilt was still there, a cold stone in his gut. The faces of the people trapped in Metropolis were afire at his back. But now, it wasn't a paralyzing force. It was fuel. Sir Night Eye had died believing in a future Izuku could change. All Might had passed on his power believing in the hero Izuku could become. He had stumbled. He had fallen. But he was not broken. He took the mug of now cold coffee and drained it in one gulp. The bitter liquid was a shock to his system, a jolt of harsh reality. The time for grief was over. The time for mourning was a luxury they couldn't afford. The strategist's burden wasn't just about making the plans. It was about carrying the weight of them when they failed, and finding the strength to make a new one from the ashes. He looked at the plan on his screen, a chaotic symphony of desperate hope. Now, he just had to convince the rest of the orchestra to play his song. Izuku strode back into the main command center, the quiet confidence of his new plan radiating from him like a low hum of power. He was no longer the guilt-ridden analyst replaying his failures. He was a leader who had found his footing in the heart of a storm. Bruce followed a pace behind, a silent, dark affirmation of the strategy to come. The other members of the League, still lost in their own circles of grief and frustration, looked up as they entered. The shift in Izuku's demeanor was palpable, cutting through the heavy atmosphere of defeat. "I have a plan," Izuku announced, his voice clear and steady, leaving no room for the doubt that had plagued him just an hour before. He didn't wait for questions. He strode to the central holographic dais, and with a sweep of his hand, brought his chaotic, multi-pronged strategy to life in shimmering blue light. The globe of the Earth became the centerpiece, with Brainiac's colossal skull ship hanging over the void that was Metropolis. From the watchtower, 5 distinct vectors of operation shot out, each a different color, each aimed at a different aspect of Brainiac's global network of probes. It looked less like a battle plan and more like a work of abstract, desperate art. Hal Jordan was the first to scoff, the sound sharp and grating in the tense silence. "Another plan? What's this one, Midoriya? We throw everything we have at it, but this time we cross our fingers?" The sarcasm was a brittle shield for his wounded pride. "No, Hal," Izuku said, meeting his gaze without flinching. His calmness was disarming. "That's the opposite of what we're going to do." The last plan failed because it was logical. It was a head-on assault against a superior force. It was predictable, and Brainiac dismantled it. This plan is anything but." He gestured to the first vector, a golden line that wrapped around the entire planet. "This is Team S.H.I.E.L.D. Clark, Diana, Superman, who had returned from the Solar Bay, his strength restored but his spirit still heavy, looked at the line with a frown. "Our mission? Your mission is to do what you do best," Izuku said, his voice imbued with a sincere respect that caught the Kryptonian off guard. "But not against the ship. You are not to engage the Skull ship or the primary probes at all. Your battlefield is the entire world. Brainiac is expecting planetary-wide panic. He's counting on it. It's part of the psychological profile he's building. You will deny him that data. You will become living symbols of hope on a global scale." He expanded the projection, showing them real-time disaster alerts that were being ignored in the face of the larger crisis. An earthquake in the Pacific Ring of Fire, a tsunami forming off the coast of Indonesia, a runaway reactor in a European power plant. "You will stop these disasters," Izuku commanded. "You will save every single person you can. You will be seen. You will be a message, broadcast to the entire world, that even with that thing in our sky, we are not broken. We are still here. We are still fighting for them. You will deny Brainiac the satisfaction of our terror. You will give him a data point he cannot compute, unwavering, illogical hope." Clark and Diana exchanged a look. This was unexpected. It felt counterintuitive, like turning their backs on the main threat. But as they processed Izuku's words, they understood the deeper strategy. Brainiac fought minds, systems, data. This was a battle for the planet's soul, and they would be its champions. "It is a worthy mission," Diana said, a flicker of her warrior's fire returning to her eyes. "To inspire in the face of oblivion is a victory in itself." Clark nodded, his expression firming with renewed purpose. He could not save the people already trapped, but he could save the ones who were still free. He could honor the people of Metropolis by protecting the rest of the world. We'll do it. Izuku turned to the next vector, a chaotic, zigzagging line of red and green that didn't attack any single point, but instead seemed to weave through the network connecting the probes. Team Ghost. Barry, Hal crossed his arms. Let me guess. We fly around and look pretty too? You do something much harder. Izuku replied, his expression serious. You're not going to destroy Brainiac's network. You're going to infect it. You are going to be the chaos I was talking about. He zoomed in on the energy grid connecting the probes. This network is based on pure, cold logic. Information flows through it in perfectly ordered streams. You are going to introduce variables that logic cannot process. Barry, he said, turning to the speedster, I need you to phase into the data stream itself. Not your body, but your energy signature. Vibrate at a specific frequency. I'll feed you the modulation, and you'll become pure static. Data noise. You'll corrupt the packets of information, not by destroying them, but by inserting random, meaningless bits of speed force energy into the stream. You'll be a ghost in the machine, causing glitches, rounding errors, and system-wide confusion. Barry's eyes widened, a slow grin spreading across his face. So I get to be a computer virus? A really, really fast one? Oh, I am so in. This was his kind of science, the wild, theoretical physics that he loved. And Hal, Izuku continued, his gaze intense. Your role is even more abstract. The first probe analyzed the energy of your ring, but it only analyzed it as a weapon fueled by will. It has no context for the emotion behind the will. I need you to create constructs of pure, raw emotion. Don't make fists or jets. Make a construct of your memory of the perfect sunset on Oe. Make a construct of your grief for your father. Make one of your unshakable hope for the future. Project raw, unfiltered, chaotic emotion into that logical network. Rage. Joy. Fear. Hope. These are concepts Brainiac can quantify on a biological level, but not as tangible forces. You will give his system a full-blown emotional breakdown. Hal was stunned into silence. He had been a soldier, a cop, a pilot. He used his ring as a tool, a weapon. Izuku was asking him to use it as a paintbrush for his soul. It was the most ridiculous, and most brilliant, application of his power he had ever heard. For the first time since their defeat, a genuine, cocksure grin spread across his face. Corrupt a supercomputer with feelings? Now that sounds like a party. Next, Izuku highlighted a deep blue vector that plunged into the depths of the Atlantic Ocean. Team Leviathan. Arthur, the king of Atlantis, stepped forward, his trident, a symbol of his rule over 70% of the planet, held loosely in his hand. The seabed is riddled with its power conduits. I have already sensed them. They are a blight upon my domain, and you're going to purge them, Izuku confirmed. But not just you. Brainiac's drones are designed for every conceivable combat environment based on the data he's collected. But his database is terrestrial. It contains every known animal, every geological formation. It does not contain the things that sleep in the deepest, darkest trenches of the ocean. The things that predate humanity. The things that live in places where the pressure can crush steel, and the only light is the one they create themselves. Izuku's voice was filled with a sense of awe. Arthur, I need you to wake them up. Unleash the true, ancient power of the sea. Bring forth creatures of magic and myth that are not in any of Brainiac's files. He has a counter for a nuclear submarine. He does not have a counter for a kraken. A slow, fierce smile spread across Aquaman's face. This was not a request for a soldier. It was a plea to a king to unleash the full, untamed fury of his kingdom. It shall be as you command. The deep will answer my call. This alien will learn to fear the ocean's heart. Finally, Izuku drew the last line, a thin, stealthy black vector that led from a hidden location on Earth directly to the hovering Skull ship. Which leaves the final mission. Team Scalpel. Bruce, and me. All eyes turned to the final, suicidal part of the plan. While the rest of you are creating chaos, noise, and hope, you will be giving us a window, Izuku explained. Brainiac's central processing will be forced to divert massive resources to analyze the illogical data you're feeding it. Its internal security will be stretched thin. Its predictive algorithms will be focused on the global threats, not on a single, tiny, insignificant intrusion. In that window of confusion, we will use a modified version of the Javelin, equipped with a stealth drive based on your own designs, Bruce, to board the ship. And once we're on board? Bruce asked, though he already knew the answer. We go for the core, Izuku said, his voice dropping to a grim whisper. We're not fighting the ship. We're not fighting the army of drones. We are a scalpel, and we are performing a lobotomy. We find Brainiac's central consciousness, the core of his being, and we cut it out. The sheer, audacious insanity of the plan hung in the room. It was a symphony of chaos, a multi-layered gambit that relied on every single member of the team trusting not only Izuku, but each other, to perform their roles perfectly. It was a plan that could fall apart if a single piece failed. A heavy silence descended. The heroes looked at each other, processing the sheer scale of what Izuku was proposing. He was asking them to fight not with their fists, but with their very nature. He was asking them to trust a strategy that felt like a wild, desperate prayer. Clark was the first to break the silence. He stepped forward and placed a hand on Izuku's shoulder. The gesture was firm, steady, a transfer of confidence and trust from the world's greatest symbol of hope to the young man who was trying to weaponize it. We trust you, Izuku, Superman said, his voice resonating with unwavering sincerity. Your mind brought us to this point. We believe it can lead us through it. That was all it took. The dam of doubt broke. He's right, Barry said, zipping to Izuku's other side. It's crazy. It's insane. It's probably going to get us all killed. But it's the first thing that's made any sense since this whole mess started. I'm in. The honor of Atlantis is with you, Arthur declared with a nod. Let's go show this tin can what real feelings are, Hal said, cracking his knuckles. Diana stepped up to face Izuku, her gaze piercing. She studied him for a long moment, not as a strategist, but as a man. She saw the weight he was carrying, the burden of leadership he had so reluctantly, yet so completely embraced. Hera, grant us strength, she said, a small, fierce smile touching her lips. Your gambit is a bold one, Izuku Midoriya. Let us see it through to the end. Izuku felt a wave of emotion so powerful it almost buckled his knees. It was trust. Absolute and unconditional. It was the faith of gods and kings, of legends and heroes, all placed squarely on his shoulders. He felt the echo of All Might's voice in his heart, not as a specter of failure, but as a source of strength. A hero can always break out of a tough spot. He looked at Bruce, who gave him a single, curt nod. It was all the confirmation he needed. All right, Izuku said, his voice ringing with a power that had nothing to do with his quirk. Let's get to work. I'm sending each of you the precise mission parameters and timelines. Synchronization is everything. Team Shield, you deploy first. We need to stabilize global morale before we begin the main operation. Team Ghost and Team Leviathan, you begin your assault on my mark, precisely in 90 minutes. Bruce and I will launch during the peak of the system chaos you create. Go, and be the variables they can never predict. The command center, once a chamber of despair, became a hive of determined activity. The heroes of the Justice League, broken and defeated just an hour before, were now filled with a wild, dangerous new energy. It wasn't the certainty of victory, but the defiant resolve to fight their own way. 90 minutes later, Izuku stood with Bruce in the hangar bay of the watchtower, beside a heavily modified Javelin. It was smaller than the standard model, its sleek lines now coated in a matte black, radar-absorbent paint. Its engines had been retrofitted to run almost completely silent. It was a ghost ship, designed for a single, deadly purpose. Izuku was clad in his hero costume, the cowl up, his face set in a grim mask of concentration. The full power of One for All flowed through him, a calm, deep ocean ready for the storm. He could feel the vestiges within him, not as voices, but as a silent counsel of approval. This was the kind of thinking the second and third users, leaders of a rebellion, would have appreciated. This was a guerrilla war against the mind of a god. On the comms, a symphony of chaos was beginning to play out. Team Shield is engaged, Clark's voice reported, calm and reassuring. We've stabilized the tectonic plate off the coast of Japan. The earthquake is subsiding. We're en route to the Indian Ocean now. The world is watching, Izuku. You're giving them something to hope for. Copy that, Superman, Izuku replied, his heart swelling with pride. Keep it up. You and Diana are our first line of defense. He looked at the tactical display on his wrist. The global panic index, which had been at a catastrophic high, was beginning to dip. Small pockets of green, hope, were appearing on the map. All right, teams Ghost and Leviathan, Izuku commanded, his voice dropping. It's time. On my mark. 3, 2, 1. Execute. Across the planet, the war for Brainiac's mind began. In the data streams connecting the North American probes, a new kind of virus was born. Barry Allen, pushing his body to a frequency that bordered on the intangible, became a being of pure, chaotic energy. He dove into the river of information, and the perfectly ordered flow of ones and zeros began to stutter. He wasn't destroying data. He was rearranging it, inserting random fragments of the speed force, causing cascading rounding errors that rippled through the entire network. On Brainiac's displays, flawless schematics would suddenly glitch, showing a bridge with 3 ends. Financial data would be corrupted by a single, errant decimal point that threw entire algorithms into chaos. Simultaneously, Hal Jordan flew high above the Atlantic, his eyes closed in concentration, his ring glowing with an intensity that outshone the stars. He wasn't creating objects. He was projecting pure, raw emotion. A construct of pure, unadulterated hope, the memory of his nephew's first laugh, slammed into the network, and the logical processors trying to analyze it began to report paradoxical errors. A wave of his own deep-seated grief followed, a complex, multi-layered emotion that the system tried to categorize and failed. He followed it with a blast of defiant, furious rage, so potent it manifested as a shimmering, emerald aurora in the sky. He was a one-man psychic assault, turning his own heart into a weapon. Deep below the waves, the ocean began to churn. Arthur Curry stood on a volcanic vent at the bottom of the Marianas Trench, his trident held high, its tips glowing with bioluminescent power. He sent out a call, a command that echoed through the crushing dark, a song of kingship that resonated with the planet's oldest and most terrifying secrets. And the deep answered. From the abyssal plains, colossal shapes began to stir. A kraken, its body the size of a mountain, its tentacles lined with hooks of obsidian, uncoiled from a slumber of millennia. Its massive, intelligent eye, a universe of cold fury in itself, fixed on the alien power conduits scarring the sea floor. Ancient, armored leviathans, covered in glowing runes of Atlantean magic, rose from the silt. Swarms of bioelectric creatures, whose existence was unknown to surface science, gathered into a living storm of lightning. They fell upon Brainiac's undersea network not as an army, but as a force of nature. The Kraken's tentacles, imbued with a magic that predated technology, tore through shielded cables with ease. The Leviathans swallowed drones whole, their armored hides impervious to laser fire. The storm of deep-sea lightning shorted out entire power substations. Brainiac's drones, designed for naval combat, were helpless against the sheer, mythic terror rising from the planet's heart. Back on the watchtower, Izuku watched the data streams pouring in from their global network. The plan was working. Brainiac's system was in chaos. Alarms were blaring across its network. Processing power was being diverted from the Skull ship's internal security to deal with the emotional attack, the data corruption, and the unidentified biological threats. In the ocean, the enemy's monolithic attention was fractured, splintered into 1,000 different crisis points. A new icon appeared on Izuku's display. A tiny, almost imperceptible gap in the Skull ship's external sensor grid. A blind spot, created by the processing lag. It would only be open for a few seconds. There it is, Bruce said, his hand already on the Javelin's hatch. Our window. Izuku took one last look at the holographic display, at the beautiful, chaotic mess his friends were making for him. They were fighting with hope, with feelings, with myths. They were fighting as unpredictable, beautifully, defiantly human variables. He pulled his cowl tighter, the green lightning of one for all crackling over his fists. Let's go perform a lobotomy, he said. The Javelin's hatch hissed shut, and with a silent, ghost-like grace, The small ship detached from the watchtower and plunged toward the wounded Earth, a scalpel aimed at the heart of a god.